We are back with another installment. This time I wanted to approach problems, troubleshooting, tips and tricks to making good pellets. It is a bit of a fine art to make a decent pellet out of these machines. The flat die pellet machines, which are these. This is the almost the top of the range. It's a 360 millimeter, which is the diameter of the die plate on here. The largest one you can get is 400 mil, so 40 centimeters, just a little bit taller, and the output is a little bit more per hour, or supposedly the specs don't quite match up. I'll approach that later on in the video. Once you go up from here, you get into the ring die pellet machines, which are, you know, in the tens of thousands of pounds. I have had quite a few people asking me where I got this. I did post up the link from Alibaba. I got it off the lovely Sia Leon, who will help you out. If you go to the link on my other video of making or the process of making wood pellets, you'll find it on there. I'm not affiliated. I'm not making any money out of it. I'm doing it just to help you guys out. So just give me a thumbs up or whatever. I don't really want anything. Cool. So problems and problem solving with making pellets. The most common problem that you get from these machines is blockages, jams and stops. I would recommend you, if you haven't already purchased a pellet mill and you are thinking of doing so, buy the biggest machine, engine, diesel engine or electric engine, or PTO shaft for the highest power rated tractor engine you can buy. This one personally set me back £3,200 delivered to my door, all taxes included. That was everything. So in terms of return on investment, it's amazing, because you know, that it's £1,200 of pellets per season. I've just added another pellet stove, which is going to double that if I use the rest of my house. So the return on investment is, you know, a 2-year turnaround. Happy days. So blockages and jams from these things occur for numerous reasons. As I mentioned before, it's a bit of a fine art to making these things. You have to go from start to finish. The start is obviously what you are putting in. Wood, pure wood, is the best for these things. You want to reduce the size to smaller than the die holes. The standard die hole for these machines is 6 millimeters. That's what goes into most pellet stoves if you're making them for heating. So you want to reduce it down using a hammer mill and a screen plate that's less than 6 millimeters. I have a 4 millimeter screen plate on this one, so that it's not too fine, but it goes through the machine a bit quicker. Moisture content is a huge one. You want between 9% and about 14%. You can use a hygrometer, a probe. I got one, a cheap one, again off of eBay, about 20 quid, and it does the job. It works fine. Again, this is the reason why I would say invest in a larger powered, or the largest powered flat die pellet mill you can afford, because the higher the power of the machine, the higher the power of the tractor. I'm running a 70 horsepower tractor here. The less necessary it is to get the moisture content of what's going in absolutely bang on the button. If you're using the lower rated machines, they are very, very finicky, and you have to have a consistent input, you have to have a very consistent feed, and you have to have a very consistent moisture content. So the larger powered machines, the less finicky it is on moisture content. This is a roller turned pellet mill, specifically designed to make wood pellets. Now, a lot of people don't know this about these wood pellet machines, is that they have specific die thicknesses. For the lower ranked pellet machines, the 4 and 5 kilowatt and the 7 and 9 horsepower diesel engines, they tend to have a die plate that's specifically designed for feed pellets, so they're actually thicker. Feed pellets where you're putting corn, where you're putting all sorts of beans and fodder to feed chicken and cattle. The die plates are actually almost twice as thick because they need a lot more compression ratio. They're like a 1:8 or a 1:6, even 1:16 compression ratio, where they're forcing it into the holes even more because of the lignin content. The lignin content is the cellulose that binds the pellets together. This is the core principle of what is a pellet mill. It heats up and pressurizes the pellet and melts the cellulose, the lignin in it, and then when the cellulose cools down, it hardens and forms the hardened pellet that you can put in your pellet stove. So because feedstock, because animal feed such as corn hasn't got the higher lignin content, the plates are much thicker. So in fact, if and when you go, you need to specify that you're using it for wood, because the die plates will actually be thinner. For 1:4 ratio or 1:8 ratio, that way it's not compressing it as much. This can lead to jams if you're trying to put wood in with high lignin content into a die that is designed for feed. It will block because it's trying to compress it too much. The other thing is, this is a roller turned pellet mill. So the shaft, the drive shaft that comes all the way through, comes through the die plate and then is connected to the rollers and cinched on top with a very large locking nut, two very large locking nuts. Again, try and get a roller turned pellet mill. They're much better. The output quality of the pellets is superior. They class them as a professional grade pellet in terms of density that they put out. The roller turned, the die turned, where the die plate is actually connected to the shaft running through, all sorts of problems because of the way that the chamber is set up inside. You get a lot of clogs and blockages where there's a difference. There's 1 or 2 mil gap in between the chamber of the pellet mill and the inside of the die. Also, where the locking nuts are, where you use to tighten the rollers down, leaves little spaces which fill with the material that you're putting in. So if you can get a roller turned, I have had quite a few people come to me and say that the roller turned, they're having problems with it because they don't think that the rollers are down at the right level. Now I would say that the tightness of the rollers just tighten them straight to the die plate. I didn't see, because I used to have a roller, a die turned machine, I didn't see any difference from hours and hours of playing with it. I just ended up tightening them down as hand tight. On these machines, the rollers are wrench tight. A foot long bar is used to cinch down the locking nuts on them, so it's dead tight to the clearance between the rollers and the die plate. Now, this is a huge one, and a lot of people don't tell you this. A lot of the salespeople on Alibaba, when you're buying these, but it's my biggest and best tip if you're having a problem getting these started with blockages. It's not making pellets, nothing's coming out. You've tried everything with moisture content and everything. Let it heat up. Let the die heat up, okay? I leave this, when I start, I leave it for about 20 minutes, and it seems like an eternity because you're running it, you want to get started, you want to see what it's like putting the material in. Don't, okay? It takes 20 minutes or 30 minutes to heat up the die to the right temperature before you can start making the pellets, before the pellets come out. Now with this, because it's such a a large motor, it starts making pellets, but the pellet quality isn't great. If you go down in size for the engines that you're running it off, it'll just block because it won't be forming the pellets and heating up the material hot enough. So you need to wait until the die is hot enough. You can feed through some of the oily material so that it generates friction and builds up heat on that die plate and heat in the rollers. You can feed some of the oily material through, keep passing it through up and down, and then just slowly introduce tiny little handfuls. I go just with a handful of sawdust just straight in for the first, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, just tiny little bits, and then all of a sudden it'll start coming, and then you can really put it through. Now this is the other thing that really affects the output quantity that you get. It affects how well the machine works, is the feed rate. The feed rate is massive. Now, I don't have a conveyor. A lot of these, when you're using a plant, will have a belt conveyor that will feed, and you can set the speed rate. When it's hot, when it's heated up, you can set the speed rate. Now, I don't do it. I just do it by hand. So I listen to the engine, what the engine noise is making. I see, what's going on down here, how much steam is coming out, how quickly it's going down into the rollers, how full the chamber is. So I just watch, and I don't let it go above this clearance plate here, which is used to regulate how much is going through. So I just watch and I monitor very closely for the whole 2-hour period that I'm using this machine. With a conveyor belt, it's much better because you can set the rate. But here's the main thing: don't feed it too quickly. If you're feeding it too quickly, you clog up the chamber. The first time I used this, I just dumped buckets straight in after about 5 minutes, and it filled up and trapped the steam underneath. It trapped the steam, and steam was billowing out of the bottom. And although the engine didn't quite stop because it's that big, it was getting very close to actually catching on fire. And I had to stop the machine. I had to clear it out. I had to take the whole thing apart. It took me about, an hour and a half to clean it all out with really charred stuff inside, purely because I just dumped the material in. You really cannot just unleash. It has to go in very slowly. And the feed rate, it is very important for the production rate that you're going to come out with. Now, the production rate, Alibaba are very good for giving you top dollar specs. Now, they rate this wood output as 600 to 800 kilos an hour, and let me tell you, it is nothing like that. Okay, I don't use a conveyor. As I said before, you will get a better output with a conveyor, but this runs for me when everything is going, after it's heated up, when it's running full lick, at about 350 to 375 kilos an hour. Okay, so for making the 3 tons a year, 4 tons a year that I need, that's 10 sittings, which is fine, But anybody that needs to make more or is thinking about making them commercially, that I would say that the top you're going to get out of here, if you have a conveyor, is 400, 450, with pure wood. If you're mixing it with other stuff, if you've got half wood, half grasses, miscanthus works really well. I might do a video about actually other biomass materials that you can put in, because I'm growing miscanthus at the top of the garden, and miscanthus is a very tall growing Asian grass that actually has a very low ash content when you burn it. And but I'm not doing that at the moment. I'll do that next year. But you might get 600 kilos an hour if you're mixing it with slightly softer material, the long grasses or straw materials, agri wastes, and so on and so forth. But purely wood, 400 for me, 400 kilos an hour is I'm aiming for that. If I can get 400 kilos an hour, I would be happy days. So other things, you know, you've got to check the oil in the bottom. You've got to oil and grease nipple the joints. You've got to grease nipple the grease the nipples on the shaft in here, down here, somewhere down here. I can't quite see it, but it's somewhere here. Some of the other things to watch out for specifically for the PTO is dropping the PTO on the 3-point slowly, because I have had it where I've dropped it at a slight angle and the whole thing shakes, actually, I find it better if it's raised up on a couple of pallets so that the PTO shaft is as horizontal as can be, because if there's too much of a camber on it, it can tend to get a bit of a wiggle on as well when it's moving. Other things to think about, when I first started making them, it had a riving knife to take off the pellets as they were extruded through the die, and I found that it was bashing them up too much, and the pellets were coming out quite small, little tiny bits, and quite powdery. Not all of them, but just you know, some of them in general. So I actually cut that riving knife off, and I've just put a plate that's a bit lower down. So actually, the plate comes into contact with as it spins round with the extruded pellet a little bit later on, so the pellets are a little bit longer, and that's helped no end with the output of the pellets. I can't quite think off the top of my head of any other problems. Feed rate, moisture level, material that you're putting in, size, roller plate. No, I can't think of anything off the top of my head at the moment. If you have any questions, please do leave them in the comments section down below. I still have yet to burn the pellets, so watch this space. It'll be in a couple of weeks' time. I'm looking forward to it, so I will catch you guys back then. Bye-bye.